designed to protect its inhabitants against the worst and wettest Mother Nature has to offer. It's built on a series of hydraulic pilings that can either dig into the ocean floor or raise the house up above the waves. So if you grew up watching Looney Tunes and wishing Daffy Duck would sell you a push-button home that can rise into the sky, here's your chance. And it will only cost you $5.5 million. It's not just for vanity's sake, though. The ability to raise your home higher and higher would prove mighty helpful as sea levels rise ever higher as well. Some climate experts predict sea levels could rise by as much as 7 feet come 2100, particularly in places like South Florida, where the Arkup was designed and is currently docked. If that happens, living in a place that can rise with the tide will prove mighty helpful indeed. Plus, its super sturdy windows are resistant to hurricane winds of up to 155 miles per hour. If climate change affects our waters as much as experts say it will, life-threatening hurricanes are likely to be commonplace soon enough. If the Arkup can handle that, then it's worth every penny. When you're a billionaire, you can get away with just about any housing design you have in mind. Many prefer normal-looking mega mansions, but then there's Vladislav Doronin, the Russian CEO of Aman Resorts. He decided one day that he would like to live in a giant spaceship, and so he had it built. You certainly can't fault the guy for a lack of imagination. Doronin's 28,500 square foot mansion is described on its architect's website as fluid geometries emerging from the landscape and remaining partially embedded within the hillside. Apparently, it's not professional enough to just say our client lives in an Imperial Star Destroyer from Star Wars. Nevertheless, we're going to say exactly that, because come on, what else could this non-humble abode possibly resemble? The 72-foot tall lookout tower portion of this mansion simply makes it look even more like the preferred battle vehicle of the dark side. It doesn't sound like Doronin had space in mind. His request to his architect was simply, I want to wake up in the morning and just see blue sky. How the architect got spaceship out of that when the sky is extremely not blue in space, I don't know, but I'm also super glad he did. As beautiful as many mansions are, they can suffer from monochrome patterns and an overall sameness. Not so in El Alto, Bolivia, where a local architect set out to create the most colorful, charismatic mansions he could imagine, and he most certainly delivered. Architect Freddy Mamani Silvestre's mansions are popularly called cohetillos, which is Bolivian for spaceships. One look at them and you'll see why. Each home is covered in dozens of crazy colors, non-traditional window shapes, bizarre rooftops, and unpredictable patterns. They truly do look like spaceships, or maybe a castle run by an alien overlord. His mansions aren't at all boring on the inside either. Between LED lights, Chinese chandeliers, very geometric motifs, pillars and columns, and more colors than an extra-large box of crayons, every inch of a Silvestre mansion is a feast for your eyes. But he doesn't just design this way for kicks, or because most other buildings in the area look alike. His intention is to introduce indigenous culture into a modern world. The timeless Andean and Tiwanaku styles he uses really stand out against a sea of functional ticky-tack. Silvestre has built over 70 of these spaceships so far, each one completely different from the next, and shows no signs of stopping. So if you live around Bolivia or plan to move there, and have the $300,000 to $600,000 he asks for per place, you too can live in an architectural masterpiece that's truly like no other. You know those creepy supervillain lairs built right into a mountain? The kind where Blofeld would bring James Bond to for torture and unnecessary exhibition? Well, one exists for real, and if you want to see it, you simply need to visit California's Joshua Tree Desert. No license to kill required. Designed in 1988 but not truly finished until the early 2000s, this 4,600 square foot mansion, officially called the Desert House, looks like it was carved right from the mountain. Its copper walls and roofs look almost exactly like stone slabs, and the roofs jut out far beyond the house itself, providing plenty of cool shade for its inhabitants. From a bird's eye view, it may be difficult to even see a house there at all. The designer's goal was to make the house seem like an organic part of the desert. So mission accomplished. Plus, since the home stands on 10 acres of land, your only neighbors are miles of Joshua Tree Desert. You'll be free to carry out all your evil schemes in absolute privacy. Inside, the home looks just as supervillainy, with foreboding ceilings, crazy spirals, alien-looking chandeliers, and sharp edges seemingly everywhere, even on the chair legs. The designer's website calls the interior warm and intimate, and it probably is once you hang out there. But let's face it, it looks like a place you'd extract top-secret information from your enemy in. Don't expect to move into this place anytime soon, sadly. It was purchased for $3 million in 2014 by a Manhattan Beach couple, who, according to the New York Times, wish to preserve it as a work of art. If you want a stylishly evil lair to carry about your stylishly evil schemes, you're just gonna have to build one yourself. Would you live inside this house? Would you live there with a mouse? Don't worry, that's my one and only Dr. Seuss rhyme, but I had to do it because this mansion looks exactly like something the good doctor would have drawn for one of his books. technically called the Goose Creek Tower. Everyone who isn't the owner calls it the Dr. Seuss Tower. How else could you describe this thing? It's a house with another house built on top. Then there's another smaller house on top of the second house. And this pattern continues until there are 4 increasingly smaller houses piled on top of one another. If that's not head-scratching enough, sitting on top of the 4th house is a 185-foot tower. You may be wondering what Seussical masterpiece the designer ripped this house from. The answer is none of them. People don't call it the Seuss house because it came from any particular story. They call it that because it could have come from one. Though if any Seuss character would live here, it would probably be the Cat in the Hat. He could use all that extra tower space to store his giant hats. But what is it used for? Well, according to owner and designer Philip Wiedner, he wants to install a telescope at the top, as well as launch a ham radio station. He wants to call it Radio Free Goose Creek, but I think Radio Free Whoville makes far more sense. Technically, the Seuss Tower isn't finished, not that Wiedner minds. He sees the mansion as less a place to live and more a poem to the sky. In other words, don't expect him to place it on the market anytime soon. But maybe you could convince him otherwise. I will pay $1 million. I will pay you all in ducks. Sorry, Seuss rhyming is simply too fun to resist. Who doesn't love Batman? Besides all the criminals of Gotham, I mean. The Caped Crusader is so popular, it makes perfect sense that somebody designed a mansion based on him. San Miguel's Steve Rude did just that, building his very own Bat Casa. It's a 2-story home with the Batman symbol displayed prominently out front. That said, it doesn't exactly look like the grim and dark Batcave we see in the movies and comics. Rather, this bizarre 1,500 square foot mini mansion looks like something out of an art gallery, with wavy white walls that simultaneously melt into one another and attempt to pull itself apart like cheese in a mozzarella stick. This bizarre aesthetic continues as you venture inside. Everything looks like it was fused together, with strange shapes, curves, and hundreds of sculpted branches twisting and dancing together to form a living space unlike any other. It almost looks like you're living in a plaster jungle, no more so than when you're sleeping in a bed built right into the plaster. In that sense, it does seem like you're living in a grand cave, though not the kind that would attract glum martial artists dressed like bats. The Bat Casa is so unique it's become a local landmark, and you can stay there too, albeit briefly. While the Bat Casa is not on the market, you can rent it out for around $90 per night on average. For a place with 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, and the craziest aesthetic this side of an abstract art gallery, that's a downright bargain. Living in the mountains is hard. Living near a mountain, however, inside a luxury mansion over 100 feet in the sky, surrounded by trees with no nosy neighbors, is both easy and desirable. Officially known as the Pau Solaro House, many call this 10-story estate the Falcon's Nest instead, and for good reason. It features living quarters that reach up to 124 feet in the air, a 2,000 square foot solarium that looks like a nest, and a tower atop that might as well be a majestic falcon. Set against a backdrop that includes the 6,500-foot Thumb Butte Mountain, living here is essentially like living inside a movie. The Falcon's current owners are asking for $1.5 million, which is a fair chunk of change. But whoever pays that much is getting some primo living space, with 6,200 square feet that includes 3 bedrooms and 4 bathrooms, not to mention a main floor with a 360-degree view of the Arizona wilderness below. Plus, the simple fact that you're living in a stylish version of Dr. Wily's Skull Castle, if the Falcon imagery isn't your thing, makes everything extra worth it. If you're a 90s kid who grew up on Animaniacs, you probably think living in a water tower is more a punishment than a luxury. Well, the genius architects behind the Sunset Beach Water Tower in Orange County, California beg to differ. They turned a musty old water tower into a legitimately luxurious spot to live. The 87-foot-high PCH water tower was once a regular old tower that stored upwards of 75,000 gallons of water at a time. That's more than 300 tons. But in the late 1970s, all the water went elsewhere, and the tower just stood there by its lonesome, watching over us like a forgotten Greek god. That is until the 80s, when some investors decided to revamp it into a cozy private home. They later sold it to a retired fire chief named Gerald Wallace for $800,000. He then attempted to flip it for up to $8 million. He ultimately settled for $1.5 million, meaning that he still made money on the deal, especially considering he had been renting the place out for a mere $4,000 per week. The inhabitants of this tower get a lot for their $1.5 million. Despite looking exactly like a water tower on the outside, inside you'll find 2,800 square feet of living space. This includes 3 bedrooms, a 145-gallon aquarium, and a party room featuring a fire pit that you can mechanically lift up when it's time to dance. Plus, the view of Sunset Beach simply can't be beaten. Unlike Yakko, Wacko, and Dot, you won't feel stuck inside this place. Instead, you'll feel like a monarch, looking down on your subjects while enjoying all the finest parts of life. We all know about the traditional multi-floor home setup. Living room and kitchen on the bottom, bedrooms on top. Well, here's a mansion that flips that setup on its head, literally. Located in Beverly Hills, California, this upside-down house features its living quarters on the top floor, placing the bedrooms on the lower level. That's probably a little jarring when you first move in, though it does make sense. After all, if you're so tired that you just have to go to bed now, why would you want to climb a bunch of stairs to get there? That's not the reason this $3.2 million mansion's architects designed their house this way, though. The area they built on contains over 100 oak trees, all of which are federally protected from lumberjacks coming in with their axes and turning them into toothpicks. So to build a multi-floor estate, they had to build one of the floors directly into the hillside. And since the only earth-level floor is entirely see-through, it wouldn't make for a ton of privacy when getting your sleep on. But if you're sleeping in the basement surrounded by protective greenery, you have as much privacy as you need. So while it's not literally an upside-down house like Dracula's castle in Symphony of the Night, it's still mighty bizarre in its own right. Plus, it features no evil vampires, which is always a plus when looking for a comfortable place to lay your head. Living in a spaceship is one thing, but living in a giant battery is quite another. But that's about the only way to describe Germany's heliotrope, both in shape and function. This 48-foot-high mansion is literally battery-shaped, but its circular setup isn't just designed to be cool. The heliotrope actually rotates, though unlike those novelty restaurants that make it hard for those with motion sickness to enjoy their sandwich, it doesn't do so every day and only rotates 180 degrees. Adding to that, it's solar-powered, and its rotation follows the sun. It faces the sun during the cooler months and turns its insulated back to the star during the hot times. This means that at all times the heliotrope is appropriately absorbing solar energy. It actually produces more energy than it uses, making it the first home in history to do so. Sadly, 25 years after it was built, it remains one of the few homes that do. Architect Rolf Disch, who designed the heliotrope in 1994 and still lives there, leads a luxurious life, as well as an environmentally friendly one. The heliotrope is huge, with tons of rooms, as well as a garden terrace, viewing deck, and naturally a sun deck. Hey, who said saving the planet had to be uncomfortable?